Today we are going to be using the roaster method to dye wool naturally for things like needle felting and beginner spinning. The roaster has been set to 225 degrees and is filled with water and has been heating for about 15 minutes and is ready to begin the mordant process. The wool has been weighed and is sitting in just about 2 ounces, which is perfect for creating just sort of dyeing up enough wool for needle felting. Over here we have the alum that's ready to be used, and then this here is a 5-gallon mesh painter's bag. And you can get these at any hardware supply store, and they're great for actually putting the wool into and getting it ready to sit in the water without it being able to float around or sink to the bottom. The wool has now been placed into the roasting pan. You can see that it is simply floating inside of that mesh bag. And there's a couple of reasons why this mesh bag is great. First, again, the wool is not free floating. And then 2, it's going to be the easiest way to pull the wool out of the roaster. One of the things that's always a concern for wool is it beginning to felt in any way. So I simply just gently placed the mesh bag on top of the water, and then using a fork I just basically helped it to immerse fully, but there was no real movement. The wool will not be moved again until the dye process, and then just slightly. So it will now sit in the roaster for at least an hour, and it will soak up the alum and get ready to be dyed. So we now have perfectly mordanted wool that is ready to have its color, have its dye added to it. It's been steeping in the roaster between 225 and 250 for the last 2 hours. It hasn't shifted or moved, and that's definitely something important to remember, is that you don't want the water to ever begin to boil or really even simmer. You just want it to be very, very hot. So a little bit different than the way we would treat yarn, because normally we would allow a little bit of simmering with the yarn, but here with the wool we don't want any movement. So an hour to 2 hours of soaking in the mordant with a setting between 225 and 250, good amount of steam, good amount of heat, but no boiling. Our dyes are ready to go. We've made the dye from the powder dye, the powder concentrate, and then a little cold water added to it, and then boiling hot water to make the amount of dye that you want to use with the wool. And here we are just going to simply begin to pour the color over the wool. Being careful to put the color where we simply want it to be. And then we'll do the same here for the pink. And if you're using smaller quantities of wool rather than dyeing for 8-ounce skeins, it tends to work out a little bit better simply because there's more room for things to move around, less chance of white spots. Now you can leave it like this, just simply with the dye put over the wool and allow it to not move at all, and it will begin to seep fully into the wool, but it will also leave white patches. Some people really like that. You can also take your spoon and ever so slightly lift up, allowing some of the dye to come underneath and begin to get on that bottom part. Same thing over here. Remembering that this method is more of a random way of dyeing yarn, meaning the colors are going to flow organically. You're not placing the color where you want using a concentrated amount of dye. You are instead just putting in a certain amount, letting it seep for about 30 minutes, and then pulling it out and being happy with the way that it looks. So this will sit for a little bit over 30 minutes, and then we will gently pull up the mesh bag, put it in the strainer, and get it completely cool down, and then very, very, very gently we will rinse it out. So as you can see here, the wool is now in the strainer. that we talked about yesterday, so the plastic strainer, and underneath is the plastic tub. So this will allow the wool about a half an hour to an hour to completely cool down, to basically get all of the excess dye, excess water out of the wool, and then it will be returned to the bucket underneath, clean with fresh water to soak, and then it will be hung to dry. So here is what it looks like once it has been dyed up. Once your fiber has been rinsed and slightly dried, you can hang it on a regular clothes rack and simply allow it to dry in the sunshine outdoors, or inside with a towel underneath. And now you have naturally dyed wool ready for spinning, for felting, or for any other fun wool project.